Here I am. Good morning, critical thinking classroom. I hope that you are here joining me and you're ready to go. So, we're changing our time just a little bit. I'm trying to get some things adjusted. We have a bookless classroom that I scheduled an hour and a half for, and I think I scheduled an hour and a half for this one, an hour and 15 minutes or something like that. That's too long for these classes, especially for the younger ones. We're going to be here for an hour and 15 minutes. We may have usually scheduled this for an hour and a half, maybe not. It doesn't matter. This is what we're doing, an hour and 15 minutes. We might be changing the time a little bit. I don't know. We will decide, but this looks good right now. So 11 o'clock to 12:15 is when we will be meeting here in the critical thinking classroom. Okay, so what have we been talking about in this classroom? All right, everything that we are thinking about in our critical thinking, we're running through Bloom's taxonomy. So take a look at our first couple classrooms because that's really where we introduce our Bloom's taxonomy. And all this is helping us do is make sure that if I were to think critically about anything, it doesn't matter what I'm thinking critically about, right? I might be thinking critically about the stories that are in this, right? So this is what I'm reading to my early bird classroom. So I'm thinking critically about this. What do I want to do if I'm thinking critically about this? Well, I want to recall anything that I might know as soon as I, and this is all dynamic. It moves back and forth, right? So sometimes I'm recalling, sometimes I'm understanding, then I go back to recall again, right? Sometimes. So I recall what virtues mean to me, language as I'm reading, that kind of stuff, right? All of that is involved in my memory. And then, like I said, we try and understand what I'm reading. I'm just not remembering what each one of these words are, right? I'm remembering what they mean. I'm understanding what this means in a greater context, right? I'm analyzing what does that virtue of courage mean, right? Do I understand the story? Evaluation is kind of interesting, right? Because the way that we typically evaluate things using what? Tests is what we usually do, or quizzes or something like that. Grades was something that I can grade, and that's an evaluation. And a lot of times when we think about evaluating, we think about, an evaluation that an employer gives for us. But why can't we evaluate our own performance, understanding? It may be that you can say, well, yeah, my evaluation is that it's not for me because I looked at the book and it is for a child. So it's not for me, right? So that's my evaluation. Now, all your understanding is not that you evaluate according to a grade. It's that you can evaluate all kinds of things, right? You can that you do this in a regular way. If it's something less important, I evaluate that book is not interesting to me because it's too young for me, right? Well, okay, so we evaluated that is not for us. Typically, when we go through something like this, the entire taxonomy of Bloom's taxonomy, when we go through something like that, we are doing that for the purpose of really trying to understand something that we need to understand. We don't go through Bloom's taxonomy for something that we say, not for me, right? We go through Bloom's taxonomy when we are really trying hard to understand new concepts and things like that, right? Not for something easy, but for something that is more difficult. Okay. All right, now we talked about all of these surveys that you can do and the reasons why you might want to engage in going through some of these surveys. What they do is they give you some great baselines to tell us basically where we're at. Okay. Now, this critical thinking is going to be about happiness and how we get happiness. And there's going to be all kinds of little idiosyncrasies to this. And the reason why is because, and when I say idiosyncrasies, I am meaning that there are all kinds of little facets to it, right? That can be small, they can be big, they can be simple, they can be complex, right? But all kinds of different facets, variables, things that play a part in our level of happiness. And so we really want to, because if it were so easy, we'd be able to say, okay, here is the ingredients to happiness. There you go get it, right? And my job as a parent would have been done a long time ago. But that's really not what we do, right? That, of course, that's not what we do. We don't just, we're not able to just, get a recipe for happiness. Although I'm going to give you a recipe for happiness, and we're going to critically assess whether or not that's a good recipe for happiness. Okay. So, but again, we want to try and take a look at all of these facets to this, because we are going to roll into topics in critical thinking about self-esteem and other variables that we think can play a big part in our happiness, like self-esteem. We want to know how it does exactly play a part in our happiness. So as we lay the foundation, as I'm laying foundation, and we're critically thinking about what makes us happy, we're going to be rolling into other topics that are closely related, like self-esteem. If there's something that you would like to see in these videos as we're relating, or you have questions about, trying to get yourself happier, put them down in the comments for me, and I will take a look at them, because I am, I want to hear what you have to say about this, and whether or not you think that we're on, on the mark as far as trying to tap into a lot more positive emotions than what we've been seeing lately, right? Okay, all right. So what is authentic happiness? There has been a lot of research, and we're calling this authentic happiness as opposed to just happiness. We've talked about the fact that there are a lot of things that can make us happy, right? A lot of things that can make us happy. I could eat a slice of pizza, and that can make me happy. And we've talked about these three things already before. I'm going to go over them. I think we talked, yeah, I'm pretty sure we've talked about them. I'm going to go over them a little bit more clearly, but also to add a couple caveats to get to this goal that we're talking about, which is the goal of flourishing. Okay? Happiness is a mood, basically. And we talked about the difference between happiness and, for example, joy. Joy is something that is long lasting. And really what we're talking about, our common language says, I want to be happy. The ultimate goal, when we ask people what their values are, their ultimate goal is to be happy with whatever lot I have in life, right? Whatever I have, my ultimate goal is to really be happy. Because then I'll be happy if I don't have a new car. I'll still be satisfied. So our ultimate goal in the language that we use is, I want to be happy. That's the language that we use. However, I can eat a piece of pizza, and that can make me happy for the moment. You can tell me a funny joke, and that will make me happy for the moment, right? You can compliment me, and that might make me happy for the moment. So this is our common language. Our common language is, we're looking for happiness. We're striving for happiness. But when we get to the fine print, the idiosyncrasies, all of those fine little variables that contribute to happiness, we really aren't talking about happiness. Our language really should be talking about joy. We don't use that word. We don't use that word in psychology either very often. We don't hear that word, except for Christmas time, joy to the world. That's about it, right? So in psychology, we use the expression authentic happiness. And when we're talking about authentic happiness, we really are talking about joy. All right. All right. So what are those ingredients? And we've talked about this before. The pleasant life, I need pleasure. So I do need something that my senses enjoy. I do need sometimes a good piece of pizza. I do sometimes need a gentle caress. I do sometimes need to have warmth, right? So all of those are pleasures of the senses, and we clearly do need those things. The good life, we have the good life there. The good life is engagement. And I have lots of videos out there about getting right now, but I probably likely will. But I'll show you. So I've been starting these seedlings there. And the purpose of this, of course, is so I have corn, I have cucumbers, I have watermelon, I have cantaloupe, I have all kinds of things. I haven't planted strawberries yet. I have to plant strawberries, but beets and green beans and all kinds of things like that I have and that I'm planting. And I'm going to use these in the video, and I'm also going to be building garden beds as well. So raised garden beds. And what I want to do then is I want to start my garden. So this is part of engagement. So all the work I'm trying to do to show you how to break free of this nastiness that we have in our families, that we have in our communities, that we have in our own bodies, in our own thinking, right? We are able to get rid of that by thinking in healthy ways, by critically thinking in healthy ways, and then also by actively engaging. This is part of Bloom's taxonomy of applying. And that's exactly what I'm doing here in the classroom. Part of Bloom's taxonomy. I think that people need to be taught these kind of basic things. And I think that everybody agrees on learning these basic things in the classroom. And so what do? Instead of talking about it and thinking about it and feeling about it, what do? I engage is what I do. So that's what I am really trying to do in this critical thinking classroom, to get you to think about these things so that you are applying, you're processing, you're feeling, you're evaluating, you're doing all of those things. All of that engagement, pleasure, meaning, which we haven't gotten to yet, but you've seen it and we've talked about it. So purpose and drive, all of that not only contributes to happiness, long-term happiness that we're calling authentic happiness, but it contributes to our health as well. The goal there isn't happiness, actually. So we want to kind of use the right language because that helps us really understand the subtleties of what we're talking about. We've talked about this before when we've talked about language, right? That it's not just happy, sad, mad, or glad, sad, mad. No, how about euphoric? How about melancholy? How about contemplative, right? All of those things, all of those, that verbiage, all of those words give a richness, not just to our words and our vocabulary so we sound smarter. It literally gives us a richness to who we are, a richness to the way that we think about something. It's not sad, but it's melancholy, right? It's not happy, but it's euphoric. That gives us a different understanding of what you're experiencing, and then see how that depth can engage me more. I'm happy. I'm glad. I'm euphoric. What? You're euphoric? You're euphoric? What did you do? Right? What are you doing that makes you euphoric? Sounds like it might be drug induced. Do you see how we can get a subtlety to it when we see euphoria? There is some kind of a physiological, almost out of your head kind of state that you've got there going on, right? Outside of your own mind, sort of. So there's a richness in language that literally better prepares our mind and our body and our emotions for understanding, for applying, for interacting, for evaluating, all of those things. We need a richness to our language in order to have a richness in our lives. And if we had a richer life, even in understanding something that seems like a simple concept like authentic happiness, we likely wouldn't be so worried about what our neighbors are doing, right? We likely wouldn't be so worried and caught up in the negative um, thinking, rumination, and the negative emotions, the anxiety, and the chaos that comes along with that. You can't control other people's behaviors. The only and even if you could, the consequences of that is it's futile. It's futile. Do you think if you control somebody else's behaviors, is it because you want a slave? Is it because you want a partner? Is it because you want somebody to share ideas with? Right? So, how we treat one another is going to result in the kind of richness that we have in our own lives, right? Remember, when we're talking about our philosophical discussion on disobedience, it's not to disobey the laws, it's to obey yourself and disobey the group. If your eyes are always on the other and correcting the other person and being a busybody in the other person's life in order to straighten out their life, there is going to be no richness in your own. There can't be, because you are not experiencing meaning and purpose. It's other people's meaning and purpose. This is internal. My drive and my goals are not dependent on, they are not formulated or dependent on other people. I may utilize, right, organize in order to get those goals. I had to get a degree, so that is dependent on other things in order to be able to do this, right? But there is a need, there is a great need to distinguish the difference between fulfilling your own authentic happiness and trying to get other people to fall in line, and that's what will make you happy. I see this very often, right in my own family. I see this. People who don't like other people's ideas and then try and control the ideas. It is abhorrent behavior, is what it is. Abhorrent behavior. The goal here again is flourishing. So our goal is not simply happiness, but it is flourishing. And we cannot flourish. We cannot flourish when we are worried or busybodying ourselves with other people's business. Flourishing is an inside job, and that's where the focus of attention has to be. And again, the goal then is not happiness. The goal, we used to think about it as happiness, but that is so limiting. Happiness is so limiting because it's so fleeting, where flourishing not only demonstrates joy in hard times, but it also demonstrates this over and above, right? Over and above just basic needs, over and above being fed, over and above feeling safe, right? It's flourishing is over and above my resources. If I'm using scripture, my cup runneth over. And I'm not going to get this exactly right, but I will give you so many words that they need to be squashed down. Your cup will be so overflowing that that you'll have to push it down, and I will be giving you more, right? And I'm paraphrasing that. And you will never find that fruit, and you will never find that happiness, and you will never find real health when you are not focusing on an inside job and instead are focusing on judging other people, which is exactly what people do when they try and change their behaviors, right? They try and abolish somebody else, their person, their character, who they are, and favor for their own ideas. Watch my Bookless classroom, because that's what the early explorers did, right? Now, nobody's saying we want to change history and make those explorers, nobody is criticizing what they've done. We are critically thinking about what our behaviors would be if we would be explorers. We're not pointing the finger at other people, because flourishing happiness is an inside job. It's all I can do to get it myself. There's no reason for me to bother with somebody else, right? And if I have to force somebody to be something to get my happiness, I am completely on the wrong road. I have those happy faces there because that's a great way, and I might have said this before in another classroom, it's a great way to get young children to tell you how happy they are at the moment, right? So if I wanted to know how happy my child was, I could put those faces up there and say, hey, point to the one that shows me how happy you are. What a great way to start a conversation with your child, right? What a great way to start a conversation. So let's say that you give your child chores to do, right? And when you're, and you see that the child is getting upset or angry or not happy about it, right? And so you pull that up. How happy are you about having to do chores? And the child tells you. And you know what? And then maybe you have a conversation about how happy it makes your mom that your child told you that. How happy it makes me when we cooperate, right? And then you show your happiness pictures on there. Or how happy I'll be when it's all done and we'll be able to go out. How happy will you be when it's all done? How happy will you be when we are going to the movies tonight because we got all our work done? Right? So things like that. And that brings your sad face, your mediocre face, to flourishing, right? To over and above. So much so that I can tackle a job that I didn't want to do just a few minutes ago. I can tackle it with vigor now, right? With enthusiasm now. I can tackle that job after that nice conversation. And now my focus is not on poor me. My focus is on my goals. My goals. And remember, when we do that, all of this is stirring up all of those hormones and neurotransmitters, right? Okay. And those are the things stirring up in our bodies. That is our natural way, our natural route to happiness. All right. Now, what this is a survey. So I don't necessarily think that these surveys that I've given you are necessary for you, right? I think that you probably have a pretty good idea of your level of happiness. But sometimes we really do need somewhat of a reminder. I just wanted to look. I don't know why I don't have the questions there. There we go. Okay. Sometimes we need that as a reminder to say, you know, these are the basic questions that we take a look at when we are happy. And if I can answer these questions honestly, maybe I need to re-examine my anxiety and depression. If I can score higher on these things. So in most ways, my life is close to my ideal. Okay, let's say that I am feeling depressed because somebody gave me a test, a survey, and said, well, you scored 3 out of 10, and so you are in the early stages of depression. Because this is a lot of time what therapists will try and do, right? So you're in the early stages of depression, and let's go ahead and give you a pharmaceutical. What we want to do is we want to take control of our own bodies and our own minds in order to determine really that level that is critical enough to even consider taking pharmaceutical medication for this, for feeling sad. You want to have a better evaluation because you can do a much better evaluation of your happiness and levels of depression than going to your regular doctor and having that regular doctor or even a mediocre therapist give you 10 questions and then rate your levels of happiness. I'm going to repeat that. You can do a much better job understanding your level of happiness than any therapist who basically relies on surveys to understand your psychological condition. Okay, so why then show you all these surveys? Because they can give you, again, as we said, a baseline so that you can see progress, but also a real, maybe just a little bit better image of what happiness really is about. If your lot in life is better than average, that really does promote feelings of happiness. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, though, how we kind of come up with some of these. So in most, because we don't say, is your lot in life great, right? We don't say that on this, at least not on this survey. In most ways, my life is close to my ideal, not somebody else's ideal, my ideal. The conditions of my life are excellent. Now, you can see that that language is extreme language. Are conditions of life ever excellent, especially nowadays, right? No, but that's how we rate. And this, again, gives us a really good perspective on how far away is my life from excellent. How far away is my life from ideal? If I'm a student going to school, I'm not paying for college, and I'm getting a very good education in my field of interest, that's got to be close to an ideal life, right? That's got to be close to ideal. If I'm getting my education in the field, all right, I'm not practicing in the field yet, but if I'm getting my education, I'm getting close to my ideal life. If my scores are far away, maybe I need to reassess what my ideal life is and then what I'm doing to get there, right? That's why these questions might be good questions for you to really contemplate, especially if you are feeling anxious or depressed. Okay. I am satisfied with my life. Now, here's where, if you are feeling anxious or depressed, you can clearly score that lower. The other ones give you a comparator, like I'm comparing my life now to my ideal life. I'm comparing my life to a life that is excellent. But here, it's just asking, it's not comparing it to anything. How satisfied are you with your life? So here's where we can start seeing maybe some more realistic scores if you're feeling depression or anxiety, or scores that represent that a little better, a little differently. So far, I have gotten the important things I want out of life. Isn't that a good question, right? So far, I've gotten the important things I want out of life. All right. Well, if on your checklist, you've got your, video games and time to play, and you're not satisfied, well, you've got your two things on your checklist, video games and time to play. So why aren't you satisfied? That's a great thing to think about. Do you have the things on your list that you were hoping to have to date, up to now, the most important things on your list? If you do, right, then that would be a good examination if you're still not happy. Video games, time to play them, maybe you're still not satisfied because your list consists of video games and time to play them, and that's it, right? Yeah, you've gotten the major things out of life that you wanted to, but considering your list doesn't comprise anything major at all, then how would you experience a great depth in your happiness, right? Number 5, if I could live my life over, I would change almost nothing. Now, we talked about reverse scoring in the other surveys. None of those have to be reverse scored. All right. All of those were positively framed, and so they don't have to be reverse scored. If you remember, if something was negatively framed, it would have to be, so I never get out of life what I want, right? It would have to be reverse scored so that 7 would be a 1, 6 would be a 2, 5 would be a 3, 4 would stay a 4 on this scale of 1 to 7 here. All right. And then you tally up your scores, and basically you be the judge of it. I can tell you that a middle score is mediocre, but you already know that, right? 5 times 7 is 35. So the high score is 35. How close are you to 35? Okay, so that it's a real easy way. It's a real easy measure, gives you a bar. But again, what this is helping us do is it is helping us frame what are we calling happiness? What are we calling happiness? And if we're not feeling it, maybe we haven't identified it for us then. And then this again helps us identify what that really is. Now, I wanted to mention here that there are and we want to think about this as we're taking a look at what it means to have authentic happiness. Okay. So those 3 things. Now, it took a while to be able to get to this kind of conclusion. And why do you suppose that would be? Why would it take a while to decide? And when I'm talking a while, I'm talking like the 1990s, where they 1980s they were working on the research. 1990s is when they really put together that list right there. Why did it take so long, do you suppose, to put that list up? And then and what were we studying in the meantime? What were we were we not measuring happiness? Did we not know how happy individuals were? Did we not care? Well, in this age where you can get all these surveys and all this information just right at your fingertips, you have to realize it simply wasn't available prior to the internet. And if we were studying it scientifically, they were in scientific journals that are not made available to the public. And so asterisk right there, why isn't our science made available to the public? That's capitalism, cha-ching, right? Some things like important information regarding science should be made available to everybody. I'm certain that those universities can make their money and those publishing companies can make their money. Universities can make their money differently than having to go through these publishing companies. Okay. So, did we measure this? Did we look at this? How did we look at this? Well, a lot of the information came through because we didn't. When did you ever take a survey that said, how happy are you? That went into a national database so that I can tell how happy everybody is. When have you done that, right? We just simply don't do that. And so what happened before we started doing this in the 1980s and 90s? What were we doing? Let's say even 70s. Let's say as early as the 70s. What were we doing before then? We were taking what we called traditional measures of happiness. And that's what we looked at were traditional measures of happiness. And so what are traditional measures of happiness? They are things like, I just want to get my notes up so I don't forget anything here, because sometimes as I'm talking, I don't remember to say everything. So when we're talking about traditional measures of happiness, what exactly are we talking about? Well, we're talking about, first of all, economic indicators. It used to be that if you were rich, we thought you would be happy, right? If you had a nice house, if you had things that you could buy, we would say, psychologically speaking, yeah, you're happy. We think that you're happy. Okay, so we can get economic indicators on people. There's census data, there's tax data, right? So there's housing marketing data, so we know how much a subdivision is basically worth, right? All right. So we've got economic measures is a traditional measure of happiness. Are you employed, unemployed? What about inflation during this time? So those are all the economic kinds of indicators. Do you live in poverty? Do you live in a place with high inequality? Okay. All of that affects your economy. Is there job growth? Can you get hired, right? Okay, so all of those are economic indicators. The second one that we use as a traditional measure of are you happy is whether or not you've gone into any kind of mental health facility. Or do you claim that you're depressed? Do you claim that you are stressed, right? Have you attempted suicide? Those kinds of things are on record. Do you suffer from mental illnesses or mental disabilities? We can't even use that word. I don't even want to categorize some of these things as a mental disability, but obstacles in your mental growth, such as autism, right? So do you have obstacles in your mental growth? That, and you can see now you can begin to see how do these really play a part in our level of happiness? Does somebody who has autism have a lesser chance for being happy than somebody who doesn't? Critical thinking, right? So these were our traditional measures of happiness. Is your economy good? Are you making money, right? Are you mentally stable without any kinds of, DSM check marks, whatever you want to call that suits your fancy right now? Do you just have those? Do you have any of those DSM check marks? Depression, anxiety, autism, dyslexia, okay, learning disability. Do you have any of those? That, according to these traditional measures, suggest you have a lower level of happiness, okay? That you likely are not as happy. Physical health. So do you have cancer? Have you had cancer? Have you heart disease, obesity, right? Those kinds of things. That was a traditional measure. And that makes sense. I mean, if we do have cancer, we absolutely know that changes our whole body chemistry in a way that is not healthy. There was somebody I was listening to the other day who talked about the importance of that right there. That as a doctor, it was Deepak Chopra I was listening to. And as a doctor, he was reading a diagnosis to somebody and said, you have cancer, I'm sorry. And watched as this entire person became drained of spirit, right? Became drained of life. Now, that person didn't die, of course, but you can literally see the life pouring out of a person. And I can mentally picture it, of a person who was told that they have cancer. And then he read the report wrong, and then the restoration of life, right? We want to measure that. Because when we measure that, what that does is it tells us the extent to which even just that news affects clearly every cell in that person's body, in our body, every cell in our body. All right, and then the fourth one is the quality of life. So, do you have a full family, or are you from a split family? Do you live in a good city? Do they have city services like garbage pickup? In Detroit, we had all kinds of problems with city services, and now we're having those not the city services, not the government services, but local private services. We're having the same kind of problem here, that we can reduce your quality of life if we put stress and strain on you for those basic needs that you need provided for, like garbage service, right? And Detroit was in had real low quality of life. This was, about 10 years ago, low quality of life, because they didn't have people who were picking up the garbage. Imagine that in any city. Who would want to go to that city, and who would want to live in that city? But as you can see here, when we're talking about these traditional measures, that in these traditional measures, do they really reflect a true level of someone's happiness? And the answer is no. And the reason why is because happiness is subjective. I got to put that on a chalkboard, okay, for you guys. Happiness is subjective. And what does subjective mean? Subjective means that it is your own opinion. So what don't we have represented in that those traditional measures? What don't we have in those traditional measures? We don't have your subjective feeling. That's what we don't have. So how important is that? How important is that subjective feeling? It is the critical component. I'm doing it. Okay, so let me get that up here. It's not what I wanted to do. Okay, so there's my chalkboard. All that little work for that. What is subjective? It was important to me to put that up there so that you have a focus on that term, because that is what makes the difference between a good measure of happiness and a poor measure, or what we're calling a traditional measure of happiness. How we used to measure happiness in the past was by all of these, what we call objective measures. They're facts. How much do you make? It's a fact. Whether or not you're divorced, it's a fact. The type of city you live in, it's a fact. If you've had any past diseases, they are facts. So, what did we use to base your happiness level on? Objective measures. And isn't this interesting that as much science as we expect to have behind everything, the thing that is most important to you, that you put as a value, the highest value my students put every single time, their highest value is happiness. And that is based on your own opinion. And that's it. And that's it. It is your opinion whether or not you are close to your ideal life. It is your opinion whether or not you've gotten what you want out of life to date. That's your opinion. So in this world of science and scientific measures, here, and what is most important to you, and what contributes the most to, or contributes significantly to your health and longevity, is your own opinion about how happy you are. So when we say that perspective is everything, That is true. Perspective is everything when it comes to our level of happiness. And this is the reason why it is also so important that your perspective is true, that your perspective of your life and the gifts that you have is authentically true. It's necessary in order for you to really experience happiness. Now, the last thing I want to talk about regarding this definition of happiness is this idea of what Aristotle called eudaimonic versus hedonic happiness. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but I'm defining happiness. And so we go back to Western thought, the foundation of Western thought, and the foundation of what it means to be happy. Okay? All right. So when we go back to that foundation in Western thought, we go back to Aristotle. Aristotle was around 400, mid 400 BC. All right. So before time, before our current time as we understand it. BC, before Christ, after death, however you want to term it. We change time with the birth of Jesus. So before that birth, we have Aristotle as a philosopher, talked a lot about meaning and purpose in life and happiness. And he said his definition of happiness is being true to yourself. And in fact, he coined the term eudaimonic happiness, which is a happiness that's over and above just being fulfilled with life, over and above that. So, how do you get that? Aristotle made it very clean, very clear, very simple. How do you get that ultimate happiness, that eudaimonic happiness? How do you get it? You're true to yourself. So what does it mean to be true to yourself? What does that mean? Well, what it means is that, for example, if I'm an artist, but my parents want me to be a physician, I'm true to myself. Because if I'm not, I am not going to be truly happy. Okay? So I want you to critically think about this as well. What makes you true to yourself? I want you to think about that. What makes you true to yourself? And this really is the essence of our philosophical discussion on from and on disobedience. If I am being true to the group, then I am not being true to myself. And this is all the focus that I've been talking about all of this busybodiness that I've seen is really in adoration of the group, and trying to correct individuals to become more like their group. And what that does is it truly infringes on my constitutional rights to be happy, which is being true to myself, right? Now, we have to think about that as well, because a lot of times, especially in this day and age, I was watching this web of make-believe where individuals believe that being true to themselves requires then that they are injuring other people. And that, of course, is unacceptable. So what about that then? What about that? What about I'm trying to be true to myself, but in the process of being true to myself, I am hurting another individual? Well, if we think about that, likely what it means to be true to yourself needs a re-examination, right? Because if I am bulldozing over other people and their beliefs and their ideas, as we are seeing, if I'm doing that, there are natural consequences to that behavior. Again, we've seen it in our Bookless classroom when we're talking about the explorers, the early explorers, right? So we are seeing that there are natural consequences, and much of the consequences when they came over in and tried to bulldoze over the indigenous population, those who were native to the land, what ended up happening? Well, there was aggression, there was violence, right? There were injustices. So when we do that, we create room for the justice system to do their job, is what we do. We create injustices, is what we're doing. When we bulldoze over other people with our own ideas, we are not being true to ourselves, and the consequences are quite great. Okay? We're forcing others to be true to you, but that's not being true to ourselves. Because if we are being true to ourselves, remember, all of these things work together. If we really were being true to ourselves, we would experience positive consequences. So Aristotle didn't live during these times where being true to yourself meant completely stomping and bulldozing over another person. That's exactly what we're seeing, right? That's exactly what we're seeing. We bulldoze over other people's ideas. We don't like if they say socialism. That makes us frightened and afraid. And it is our own lack of flourishing. It's our own lack of authentic happiness that creates this need to bulldoze over other people. That's how you could tell that these individuals aren't being true to themselves, because they are so disquieted by the activities of other people, and that is what is making them unhappy. So again, the natural solution for them is to change the other people, but that's a ridiculous notion. And the notion is so ridiculous that because the consequences of doing something like that are so great. They're great for the people outside, but to the individual who thinks they're being true, maybe not so great, right? The consequences may not be so great. No, they are, because we cannot have a flourishing individual, a flourishing group, a flourishing community, or a flourishing society when we are believing that being true to ourselves means that we have to bulldoze other people. That is a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be true to yourself. If you believe that being true to yourself means that you have to bulldoze other people, you don't know who you are. How can I say that? How can I say you don't know who you are? What if you're 60 and I'm telling you, you don't know who you are? Because you don't know what it takes to make a human being tick. That's why you don't know who you are. Because you don't know what it takes to make a human being flourish, to really gain ground. That's an inside job. And if you're spending all of your time outside, you will never flourish. And that's what we see is going on right now. We see other people trying to change and bulldoze others' ideas. We see people who are trying to bulldoze and change others' ideas and their concepts. Hopefully I'm not trying to do that. Hopefully I'm trying to teach you. I want you to learn. I suppose that's just my version. But I'm being true to myself because I am a teacher. Okay. So what we did here was we talked about what it means to have authentic happiness, but we compared it to what it's not. And what authentic happiness is not is it's not those traditional measures of wealth, economy, um, better physical health, better quality of life. That's not happiness. That's not flourishing. We might have all of those things, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be happy. Okay, we've taken a look at the measure. Now, what I wanted to show you here is I wanted to show you a study that's been done. I talk a lot about studies in health that are related to our mental condition. And the reason why I do that is because I want you to be able to see that if you don't end up doing things like being true to yourself and working on not busying yourself with other people's infractions, with other people's sins, if you're not doing that, what this equates to is better health. All of those other things I'm talking about that we've seen where people are judging other people and this kind of wokeness where we're shutting other people's ideas down, where we are not letting them be able to, in my situation right now, get a job in my field, right? I'm not able to get a job in my field right now because other people are shutting down these ideas that this community in particular, they don't want to hear many of those ideas. And this comes from this political climate. It is creating, as we see, a completely unhealthy America. And for all of those people who really have been a force against what I am doing, you can really see how this is trying to build back some of the things we've lost over the last few years. What I'm doing is trying to get to a common ground in a positive way. And if you can believe that, I have a whole lot of people trying to stop this very good work. It's just such a great example. And we've talked about this in the philosophy class. Such a great example of the differences between constructive behaviors and destructive behaviors. Both of them fulfill needs. Come to my philosophy class. Both of them fulfill very deep needs. They are just two different ways to fulfill them. In a constructive way, what we are doing is we are feeding our true selves. We are feeding that very good nature within us to flourish and produce. That is, by definition, construction. Constructing from within so that I become an integral piece, an integral link in the rest of society. But when I focus on the other to change the other, that's engaging in fulfilling my need in a destructive way. And we see the outcomes of that. We see the perpetuation of hate. We see the perpetuation of intolerance for other people. We see people degrading humanity. We see people mischaracterizing others. And we see people who are telling outright lies. For what? For their own purpose, for their own agenda. This kind of destruction has great long-term consequences. That kind of destruction and busybodying of people's selves, we see, has great long-term destructive consequences. And as a spiritual believer, I know what God sees. As a spiritual believer, I know what God sees. And he sees that destructive behavior, and he knows where those people's hearts are. And those people's hearts aren't true. They aren't um, they aren't encased in love. They are perpetuating destruction. And that should be very clear. That should be very clear. You know if you are destroying another person's reputation. You know if you are destroying the truth. You know if you are promoting a liar. You know that. You might think and make yourself believe that the outcome is constructive. But if you're doing any of those things, make no mistake about it. You're destroying. You're a bulldozer. You're a bully. You're a cyber bullier. And my guess is a lot more than that. That person has a rotten soul. Does it sound like I'm talking to somebody? Okay, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this longevity study. And what they took a look at was they took a look at this group of nuns. And this group of nuns, they followed along throughout their lifetime, and in fact have followed them even longer. So they continued. So as throughout the years, so as nuns passed away, they added more nuns to the survey, so and to the study, so that they are consistently following these nuns for decades now is what they've done. And what they've been following them doing is they've been taking information on their health, basically, and their lifestyles as well. So let me get this up here because I don't have it up here. There we go. There we go. I couldn't find it right now, and I wanted to make sure I got all of my notes up here. All right, so this was a study that was done, you can see, in 2001. So by today's standards, probably an old study, but this study has been around, and we can find newer data that has been produced. I happen to like this data because what it demonstrates is data that has been collected over time for a very long time and then synthesized into this study. So there were 180 nuns that were in this study. And why do you suppose that they would look at nuns as a collective group? Well, this group actually has a lot of what we consider to be elements that can be controlled. That means that there are elements in their lifestyle and in this study that won't contribute to the outcome because it's all the same or pretty much the same for everybody. So I don't have to worry about what we call that a variable. I don't have to worry about that factor. I don't have to worry about that trait there because it's the same for all the people I'm studying. So we're studying 180 nuns, all right? What's the same for all of them? Well, they live in a commune. So the nuns don't have family like a regular family, right? So they don't have the stresses of a regular family. And they also don't have the stresses of finances because the commune, for all those nuns that live together, they work together, they cooperate, and the money comes from the church, right? Because they help the church, they provide teaching services, whatever, and the money comes from the church. So they already don't have many of the normal stressors that regular families have, like the stress of raising children and like the stress of the economy and keeping a household, okay, in the same kind of way, independent of other people who are helping them, right? They also have a specific lifestyle that they all lead. So they don't drink. They don't smoke. They engage in volunteering and positive behaviors. So that's another thing that we don't have to worry about that varies with the normal population. Normal population drinks, watches pornography, does all kinds of things that you won't find in this group of individuals, of this group of participants that are in this study. And then, and then all kinds of things that go along with that physicalness, not drinking, not smoking, no childbirth either, right? Typically no childbirth either for these. So a lot of things that can stress our health, like stress, like children, like marriage, like having babies, like drinking, all of those things are not a worry for this group. So when we see this group and we study how long this group lives, it's going to have almost nothing to do with alcohol, almost nothing to do with drugs, likely, nothing to do with smoking, almost nothing to do with childbearing, almost nothing to do with keeping finances for a house independent, right? Almost nothing to do with all of those normal traditional family things that we have to take care of. They wouldn't have those same kind of stressors. So this makes this group a very good group to take a look at and study. Okay, so what did we do? Well, we took a look at autobiographies. All right, so these individuals, when they were going to become a nun, they wrote an autobiographical statement. And so here you see these statements were not solicited then by the researcher. These statements were part of a file of statements that the church took when these nuns were entering the convent. Okay, and so what we see here is I might write an autobiography that goes something like this. I was born in Chicago. My mother's name was Charlotte. My father's name was Tony. At this time they were young. So I am 19 years old. I am asking to go into the convent because I have always desired to teach children. And I have a degree in, or I've been educated in this area, and therefore I think that I'm a great candidate to be part of this convent, right? Okay, and then there might be another autobiographical statement that goes something like this. On, December 25th, I was born into this beautiful world. And since I can remember, I have had a joy for the Lord that surpasses anyone I've seen. I see his beauty in his creation. I have prayed very hard to find a journey and a path where my heart is best open to him. Right? Okay, so we see two very different autobiographies. One that is listing something in a very sterile, factual way, and another one that's listing these things in a very emotional way. And what they did then was they compared these two groups. So they divided these scores into quadrants, into 4 groups. All right, so the highest, the next highest, and then the lowest, right? And then what they did was they compared the scores of the highest to the lowest. Why wouldn't they? Because it's going to be more gray, right? There's more subtleties. We don't know that these are real differences for the most part. No, but we want to see if there's a difference. And the only way we're going to find out if there's any difference at all is if we compare the two extremes. So that's what these quartiles are all about. They're comparing the least cheerful individuals based on their autobiographical statements. So what did they do? They looked at the autobiographical statements made by the individuals, and then they what's the word I'm looking for? And then they scored them is what they did. Okay. So they looked at their individual behaviors, and then they rated them. That was the word I was looking for more specifically. And then they rated those behaviors on how much happiness they thought that those behaviors exhibited. Okay? All right, so we've got the most cheerful, and we compare them to the least cheerful individuals on these certain behaviors. And what do we see there? We've got actually two scores there. One of them is not showing up, or two ages there, survival ages there. So we see a survival age of 85, and then actually there's also a survival age next to it of 93 that isn't showing up there because I have the nun's picture in the way. Okay, so we see that those individuals, we're talking about how long did these individuals live, is what we said. Individuals, 79% of those that were in the most cheerful quartile, the top 25% of being the most cheerful, 79% lived to 85 compared to 54% of the least cheerful lived to 85. The next age is age 93. The percentage of individuals in the most cheerful quartile that lived to age 93, 52% of those that were the most cheerful lived to 93 compared to 18% in the least cheerful group. So they cut right to the chase in this study. Does being happier lead to longer lives? And clearly we see that is the case. There were other measures that they took a look at as well. What they have noticed as well is that 52% are living to 93 in the happiest quartile. So what happiness does is it helps support the immune system, and that what negative emotions do is they suppress the immune system. So these are also outcomes of the type of lifestyle and levels of happiness that we have. There is no way when you are overly concerned about other individuals that you can be living a life that's happy. There's no way you would be in that top quartile of happiness if your life is consumed with what you believe other people are doing right or wrong. There's no way you would be in that top quartile of happiness. We know that individuals who have anger, resentment, guilt, and anxiety, that leads to poorer health. That positive emotions broaden our thinking. Positive emotions open up our minds. And this may be the reason why we see so many politically motivated individuals so close-minded. Why? Because they're filled with negative emotions. And what do negative emotions do? They close your eyes and your ears to what other people are saying. And this just goes to scripture to me, right? You have eyes, but you do not see. You have ears, but you do not hear. Because if you had eyes to see and ears to hear, you would repent. That is so perfect. You don't have eyes that see what is going on inside of yourselves, or ears to hear. This is this closed-mindedness that individuals who busybody themselves with other people's agendas and other people's lives cannot be true to themselves, which means they cannot be happy. And this is apparent in their closed-mindedness. So we can see clearly the association between these negative feelings that individuals keep purporting, right? Keep on the surface there, these negative feelings that they have, and this closed-minded attitude where they cannot hear what other people have to say. It's just a shame. It's just a shame, the things that I'm seeing lately, and it's right within family as well. Writing about significant life events contributes to these positive emotions. At first, so writing and purging, there's a little more to be said about that. And one of the things to be said about that is, at first, when you write about these negative emotions, that stirs up more negative emotions. And so there's a real interesting, real subtlety to writing about it, right? Because if you're writing about it in hateful ways, well, certainly you can't generate positive emotions. And then that falls into the category of rumination, where we're thinking over and over and over again negative thoughts. All right. That puts us in the bottom quartile over there. And what these individuals who are looking at all of these political lies that they have been focused on now for since 2020, that they've been focused on these lies, all that is creating is just acid in their whole body. Okay, so let me see what else I wanted to say about that, because I know that there was more. So for every 1% increase in positive expressions, so whenever a person has 1% or more, so let's say that somebody had an average positive expression of 50%, all right? So their average positive expression was 50%. So somebody had 51% for their average number of positive expressions in their writing, 51% positive expressions. So it's 1% more. Somebody had 52% positive expressions. So that's 2% more than the 50%. For every 1% increase in positive expressions, there is a 1.4% decrease in death rate. The most cheerful nuns lived a full decade longer than the least cheerful nuns. A full decade. And there was an 80% chance of survival to age 85 for the most cheerful, and a 54% versus a 54% chance. And we see those numbers there already. Okay, all right. We went a little bit long, but we started a little bit late, and I had a few things. So that's it for today. That's what we have for talking about authentic happiness. Now we're going to roll into, we talked pretty much, I think I told you everything. I want to talk about a few more reports, health reports that are related to this happiness, which I'm sure I'm going to fold in there. But we're going to start rolling into more of what those specific things mean for flourishing, things like self-esteem. I'm going to roll into, and that's probably what I'll talk about tomorrow. I'll start rolling into self-esteem, and we'll talk about some of the differences between happiness, as we see, is just not something that's immediate right now, right, long term, as we roll into happiness, and we roll into, then we'll roll into self-esteem. Okay? All right, that's it. If you got that. Hopefully that all made sense.